Dear all, I would like to welcome you all to this third iteration of the APAC Fintech Payments Forum, which is a collaboration between the Emerging Payments Association Asia and 10 of the leading fintech associations in our region. I'm Camilla Bullock. I'm the CEO of the Emerging Payments Association Asia, EPA. And the reason we formed this forum was so that we can better represent big and small organizations across our region in our work to enhance cross-border payments. Cross-border payments in Asia Pacific accounts for an increasingly larger share of the global markets. And I would dare to say that we have seen unmatched level of innovation happening in our region. And regulators have taken a lead in certain respect when it comes to addressing fragmentation in cross-border payments. And it was a world first when Singapore and Thailand linked up their QR-based real-time payments network in May 2021. And this was just the first of a wave of innovation, collaboration, and partnerships related to cross-border payments that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. Advancements that we are here to talk about today. Today is to learn about what's been done and what's being worked on, but also to share best practice and exchange ideas how those newly formed linkages can be used to create products and access for people in our region. I'm delighted that we have Joe Jep, Head of Payments and Data Connectivity Office at the Monetary Authority of Singapore, here to open the forum and to set the tone for this collaborative session. She will be talking about the in November signed MOU between MAS, the Bank of Indonesia, Bank Negara Malaysia, Banco Santra, the Philippines, and Bank of Thailand, where they agreed to strengthen and enhance cooperation on payments connectivity. Faster, cheaper, more transparent, and more exclusive. At EPA, we believe that sending money across borders should be as easy as making an international phone call. Following her note, we will open the panel between what we in this event call the infrastructure providers. This panel will be led by Nigel Lee, Senior VP at Ingenico, and also part of our advisory board. And this would not be the APAC Fintech Payments Forum if we don't also hear the voice from the fintechs who provide payments. The heroes when it comes to innovating on top of newly created rails. Mei Lam is the CIO of Australia Payments Plus and also part of our advisory board, and she will be leading this discussion where payments leaders active in the market that's corresponding what we heard in the infrastructure panel will talk and share what they think is best practice and opportunities coming from the cross-border linkages. But as always, you there on the other side of the screen, you are community members, our network, we want to hear from you. Hence, we have the chat open. So please share your ideas, what you're thinking when you hear those influential speakers. And before I welcome Joe to stage, maybe everybody on the line could just pop into the chat. Where are you located today? So we get this by the communication going online. But with further ado, please welcome Joe Jep from MAS.
Hi, Camilla. Thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here to open today's Fintech Payments Forum on best practices for cross-border interlinkages, which is, as you know, a topic that's very close to my team's heart. Some of you may know that my team has had the privilege of leading the industry in the past few years, breaking new ground in cross-border payments from the world's first instant payments linkage with our valued counterparts at the Bank of Thailand, and building on that linkage to establish direct linkages with significant trade corridors of India and Malaysia. So India will be launched very, very soon, and Malaysia is progressing very well. We are also the proud partners of BISIH in their Project Nexus, setting out a blueprint for multilateral payments platform. In the past years, there's been stepped up focus and ambition to enhance cross-border payments regionally. And most recently, as Camilla mentioned, the MOU signed between or amongst ASEAN 5 in November 2022 last year underscores ASEAN's commitment to realize a shared vision of a regional payments network. So this regional payments connectivity will address existing frictions in global cross-border payments, create new business opportunities, and promote inclusive growth within the region. Now, with this, we look forward to building the world's first multilateral IPS network with our ASEAN friends. The common goal, as you have also heard from Camilla just now, of all these initiatives is to make cross-border payments safe, simple, speedy, but also cheaper and more convenient. And this is a goal shared and driven by the G20 and put into action by central banks and industry participants all over the world that share that vision, like yourselves today amongst the attendees. And at the center of that vision is interoperability, which is a very critical element without which we are, confined to walled gardens. Interoperability opens up infinite possibilities of domestic, regional, and international payment connectivities. Connectivities that will power commerce for merchants, large and small, and connectivities that will enable instant and inclusive payments for migrant workers as well as for tourists, for visitors to our respective countries. Now, I see many familiar names in the lineup of speakers, so I'm quite confident you will all have a very enriching afternoon today. Thanks again to EPA Asia for having me today. So I look forward to catching up with some of you in person in the very near future. And with that, back to Camilla. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's been amazing to see what MAS has done and setting the pace for what is to come. Sometimes people ask me how much of the percentage of enhancing cross-border payments I think has been done, and I think we're under the 10%. I think we are just standing at the beginning of something amazing. So thank you very much, Joe. And with that, the first intro session is done. So we're going to bring the first panel online. So just bear with me. Great. So we are on to the first panel of today. So I would like to welcome Nigel Lee to the stage. There we go. Nigel and his panel. So this is going to have a look at the infrastructure players, and we're going to hear from Bank of Indonesia, Bank of Thailand, Bank of Philippines, Nets, and Bank of Malaysia, and PayNets in Malaysia. Nigel, over to you.
Camilla, thank you very much. And Joe, thank you for the introduction. I think being based in Singapore and having been in the market for a long time, it's very clear that Singapore has been trying to ensure, as a hub within the geography in ASEAN, trying to ensure partnership and leadership together with the organizations and of the central banks around the region to really help stimulate growth across the geography through cross-border payments. And I think that's one of the things that is really important. I'm delighted to have the guests that we have on the panel today with us to share what they have been doing and begun on this journey of cross-border payments in their geography. Also to talk a little bit about why cross-border payments has been important as a driver for GDP growth everywhere in the world. But as Camilla rightly pointed out, it largely has been focused on big business and on government to government and bank to bank. And actually, when we look across the ASEAN region, some of the most exciting opportunities for GDP growth tend to be with smaller businesses, smaller merchants, and consumer to consumer. And that's where cross-border has been focused in the last exciting steps that have been occurring over the recent period. And so what we'll hear from the panel will be what each of the geographies here within ASEAN has been doing in contributing to that. Why now? Because I think partly this is a moment in time. The technology is now available. Regulation is now much more transparent. And we'll hear a little bit about what the infrastructures that are being built today can enable that perhaps they couldn't yesterday. And also, what's the future? What does that look like? As Camilla rightly says, this is really the first step in creating this linkage for cross-border across multiple geographies. So we'll hear from a number of the players in the market, regulators and schema players. We'll hear from Pak Dudi Durman, who is the head of Bank of Indonesia. We'll hear from Lawrence Chan, who heads up Nets and PayNow, the payments infrastructure in Singapore. We'll hear from Parawat, who is heading up the initiatives in the Bank of Thailand as well, and specifically he'll talk about PromptPay. And then we'll also hear from the head of Malaysian Central Banking and PayNet, Karaman Abdul Rahman. So but first we're going to start with a video that unfortunately from our colleagues from the Philippines are unable to make it to join this forum today, but they have put together a video to explain what they've been doing.
I am honored to be given this opportunity to share updates on our cross-border payments initiatives and some of the insights we have gained thus far. The Philippines is one with its ASEAN neighbors in accelerating economic growth through better regional economic integration, especially in the areas of tourism, trade, and migrant labor. 36% of ASEAN tourist arrivals is intra-ASEAN. Intra-regional trade accounts for 21% of total. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the region observed the upward trend of intra-ASEAN migration from 1.5 million in 1990 to 7.1 million in 2020, evidence of the region's increasing reliance on migrant workers in the past decade. Labor migration contributes to the economic development of countries across the world. Statistics show that migrant workers are an integral part of the workforce in the ASEAN region. There are over 9 million working-age international migrants in ASEAN countries, with a large majority of intra-ASEAN migrants. Expanding ASEAN economic growth is underpinned by an efficient payment system. Hence, the BSP supports the pursuit of payments connectivity as it can reinforce economic growth drivers in the digital era. The development of a more efficient, interoperable, and inclusive cross-border payment system can facilitate international transactions and increase the financial welfare of Filipinos, particularly overseas Filipinos, and their beneficiaries. Many businesses, such as small and medium enterprises, and businesses in the tourism, trade, and e-commerce industries, as well as firms receiving financial support from their affiliates abroad or from global institutional investors, will also benefit from better cross-border payment services. To serve as background and context for our experience, let me begin with an overview of the BSP's cross-border payment initiatives, including our aims and strategies. Interconnected payment systems can contribute to global integration, which is of increasing importance in ensuring that policy agendas and growth reforms are sustainable and inclusive. Our efforts in connecting our payment system with other countries begin close at home in Southeast Asia. Establishing a harmonized cross-border payments landscape in the region can serve as a crucial stepping stone in achieving the ASEAN goals of economic integration and financial inclusion. The aim of BSP's initiatives is aligned with addressing the challenges identified in the G20 roadmap for enhancing cross-border payments, namely high costs, limited or inconvenient access, lengthy processing times, and lack of transparency as to the service fees, foreign exchange conversion rates, and processing status, among others. Part of the BSP's implementation is the engagement with other countries to form spheres of cooperation in enhancing the safety and efficiency of cross-border payments. There are two pathways that the Philippines is exploring in parallel, both of which seek to establish the interlinkage of the Philippines' very own instant payment system, InstaPay, with the instant payment systems of other ASEAN countries. Pursuing bilateral and multilateral connectivity will ensure the flexibility and interoperability of our cross-border arrangements. Initially, the BSP is working towards bilateral linkages between instant payment systems through the use of common or interoperable QR code standards, as well as proxy-based instruments that would allow electronic fund transfer by simply providing one's mobile phone number or email address. To date, The BSP has already engaged several ASEAN central banks to explore opportunities for collaboration in the cross-border payment sphere. In particular, the development of interlinkages with two countries, Singapore and Malaysia, are in different stages of initiation. While working on creating bilateral linkages, we concurrently explore the possibility of connecting with other instant payment systems through a multilateral platform. An example of such platform is the Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub's Project Nexus. The real-world implementation of this project is tied to the cooperation between the ASEAN central banks on regional payments connectivity. Despite our initiatives being in their early stages, we have taken note of certain best practices coming from our discussions with our partner central banks and payment industry players. First and foremost, it is important to have a clear understanding of the country's payment systems and landscape. One of the factors for the success and sustainability of the interlinkages is consumer uptake. Thus, it is of utmost importance that the service is responsive to consumer requirements and needs. The parties should also be able to evaluate aspects of sustainability, interoperability, and efficiency brought about by these linkages on top of understanding the system's capabilities and limitations. Second, it is crucial to have open and transparent communication between central banks, creating a collaborative space that is built on trust and strengthened with protocols, such as proper documentation of discussions through agreements. These factors will facilitate discussions that can speed up the progress of the initiatives. Any potential issues may also be addressed early on by finding solutions that balance the varying interests of all the parties involved. Third, collaboration with the industry is a must. It is essential to have the right infrastructure in place, along with having a common set of standards and rules, which the industry supports and can comply with. This includes having reliable and secure networks, as well as the necessary technology and systems to process the payment instructions efficiently. This helps to ensure that payments are processed quickly and securely, and that there is consistency in the way that payments are processed across different countries. As a consequence, users will have a nearly uniform customer experience, which can support our efforts to continuously build trust and confidence in the use of these digital facilities. In conclusion, now that the policy agenda of many central banks across the globe for payment systems has evolved to include the enhancement of cross-border payments in support of financial and economic integration embodied in the G20 roadmap on enhancing cross-border payments, we must undertake meaningful and extensive collaborative efforts among local and regional stakeholders, governments, and payments industry participants. We look forward to engaging with our ASEAN counterparts in building strong and solid foundations of an interoperable regional payment system that can further the proliferation of innovative, responsive, and inclusive digital financial services. This, in turn, can lead to massive digital transformation that can propel economic development, which will be beneficial to many of our citizens. Thank you for listening and for allowing me to share our insights and recent developments for cross-border payments in the Philippines.
Well, I don't know about all of you in the audience, but for me that was, I think, a really good snapshot of how a central bank is thinking about both the rationale and also the key drivers for instituting cross-border payments acceleration. My next colleague and guest here on the panel is Pak Dodi from the Bank of Indonesia, and Pak Dodi, you obviously have lots of similar discussions, I'm sure, with your colleague in Banco Central Filipinas about these sorts of issues. do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Indonesia and some of the experiences that you've seen in developing your cross-border experience?
Okay, thank you, Nigel. We have already the transparent for this presentation. Maybe somebody can help me to show about what Bank Indonesia proposed for the payment system connectivity. The first, I would like to send my gratitude to APAC for inviting me. I will give a very short overview about the latest progress of Indonesian cross-border payments. This part of the Indonesian chairman of the ASEAN 2025 regarding to the payment connectivity cross-border. In the next step, we will see about the key strategy of our to improve regional payment interconnectivity. We see the payment connectivity in the next slide has been growing in recent years through bilateral arrangements, especially among 5 Southeast Asia central banks. The first of the bilateral, we have implemented the local currency transactions and then the swap arrangement between central banks. To reach our ASEAN payment connectivity, we have 5 strategies to reach the end state to achieving strong, sustainable, balanced and inclusive economic growth and development in ASEAN country. The first strategy among the central bank, we propose the widening of a QR payment partnership, and the second one, interlink the past payments. The third one, we hopefully we can standardize of API, and then we are moving forward to RTGS interlinking, and finally we are to data framework for the MLE, anti-money laundering and CFT or terrorism. The synergy among the central bank proposed to minimize about the regulatory arbitrage among the central bank. We minimize of the shadow banking, shadow central bank or shadow currency. In the next slide, we can see about the regional payment connectivity. The next slide, the regional payment connectivity already assigned under the MOU among 5 central banks on November 14, 2022 in Bali. The initiative, we hope, will significantly contribute to accelerating regional economics recovery and to promoting inclusive growth. But as part of the Indonesia chairmanship of the ASEAN 2023, I hope the initiative could be expanded to include other countries in the regions. In the next slide, we can see how we do the regional payment connectivity. The first step, we see about the bilateral. We see about how the local currency settlement and swap arrangement already done until right now. For your information, the local currency settlement reached more than 4 billion among the central bank in a month. And the second one, we are moving to QR cross-border, and then we are moving to fast payment for the retail, and then for the wholesale, we are going to RTGS and the CBDC. Currently, for the QR cross-border, we have implemented with the Bank of Thailand. We have implemented since August 29th, 2022. And then with Malaysia, I hope this year we can implement it. And Singapore and Malaysia, we have already made the memorandum of understanding. In the next slide, we can see about how the progress of the transaction in the cross-border between Indonesia and Thailand. This is one of examples. In line with the reducing of the COVID case and then the increasing of the Google mobility and part of Indonesian policy to increase the tourism as main driver of economic recovery, we see the progress of cross-border between Indonesia and Thailand is uptrend, going to uptrend. We can see even the outbound in Indonesia is smaller than Thailand, but the going trend is very significantly increased. Indonesia, Thailand, for Indonesia tourism visit to Thailand helps already spending as much as half millions US dollar with more than 46,000 transactions per month, including in the tourism people from Thailand visit to Indonesia. They are already spending the money more than a quarter million US dollar with the people visit to Indonesia more than 6,000 people. And the next slide, we see that about the what we can learn from the RVC. The next slide, please. The RVC will be the answer the global and regional economic challenge ahead. And we believe with the RVC could be faster, more affordable, transparent, and more inclusive for cross-border payments. And in the near future, we hope the RVC will support the international trade, promoting financial inclusion, inducing sustainable finance, and contributing to sustainable economic growth. Thank you, Nigel. This is my presentation.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I think, again, it's great. This is adding on top of what we heard from your colleague at Bank Filipinas, really the perspective of Bali, the perspective of what happened in 2022 to create the RPC, and also how Indonesia has taken advantage of those in very key steps, particularly, as you say, with Thailand and with Malaysia and other aspects. We'll talk a little bit later towards the end about with the whole of the panel really and some questions. But I think two things I take away from that is both the ambition of the ASEAN region is about trying to ensure this interconnectivity can be really top to bottom in the payments spectrum, not just in one particular area, but you're starting first with access to debit payments and real-time payments cross-border, which have not really been addressed previously. And the other thing that I think is quite crucial is the size of the two things that drive GDP, the size of the flows of payment and the speed of the flows of payment. And actually some of the biggest challenges, I think you indicated that previously both of those have been a problem, that the size of transfer of payments cross-border has been restricted because of the vehicles to enable cross-border payments. And the speed of those payments being able to happen fast, seamless, transparently has also been impeded. And those have been a drag on all the economies in the geography. So I think really interesting insights there. So I'm curious, our next speaker so thank you very much for your insights in the Bank of Indonesia and the work that you've all been carrying out. So just as introduction, so Lawrence Chan is the CEO and head of NETS in Singapore. And NETS is this quasi role of being both the national schemer as well as so a very, very important part of the Singapore infrastructure, but at the same time a private and independent entity. So I'm curious, Lawrence, you're obviously going to be able to give your perspective on what's been happening in this cross-border regional initiative and how NETS is playing a part in that, and what it delivers, what some of the challenges you've seen are, and what some of the upsides and opportunities you're already beginning to see happen are.
Thanks, Nigel. Very good afternoon. Thanks to EPA Asia for this opportunity to be on. Two things I would like to speak to today. I don't have any slides, so hopefully I can catch your attention. The two things that I'd like to speak on, one is the scope in terms of the involvement, and second is the things that I think the success factors to make cross-border work. Right. So I think from a scope standpoint, it's, if you allow me to first introduce myself and who are NETS and what role we play. So I have the privileged position of being the group CEO of NETS. Within NETS, there are three companies. The two companies that I look after that are very influential in cross-border one is NETS itself, NETS entity. NETS is really if I can describe it as the domestic debit scheme locally here in Singapore. We are the scheme owner and also the acquirer for the NETS scheme. We have 6 participating banks that issue on the NETS rails locally in Singapore. The other company which I also have the privilege of leading is as a chair is called BCS. The acronym is BCS. BCS is very much like the clearinghouse of Singapore. So we are appointed the operator by our regulator to the MAS to clear what we define as the designated payment systems in Singapore. So it includes FAST, includes check, includes a domestic batch transfer called Gyro. Within FAST, we also have PayNow. PayNow is a lookup system to FAST. So BCS is the company that is the operator or the industry clearinghouse in Singapore. And thus, we've also been invited to help to drive cross-border. So from a scope standpoint, from what has been mentioned, we've been given the privilege to work on what we believe is the world first with Thailand for the PromptPay PayNow account-to-account transfer. And as Joe from MAS mentioned, we're also working to support the account-to-account transfers of India and Malaysia that are very close in the pipeline. In addition to that, from a NETS perspective, we also support P2M for cross-border. So P2M for cross-border includes where we open up our merchants here in Singapore for cross-border when they come in, and it started from way back the more traditional plastic transactions where we sign up, where we become the acquirer for different schemes. Whether it's some examples could be Union Pay from China, JCB from Japan, and more recently the likes of Alipay Plus and WeChat. So we sign up our merchants to be able to accept inbound cross-border into Singapore. And more recently, with the support given from our regulator, we've been working with different countries. So in addition to the account-to-account for PromptPay PayNow with Thailand, we also have a two-way QR person-to-merchant payment. So when a Thai resident comes to Singapore, they can use their bank app, they can use their payment apps to scan a QR. And likewise, when a Singapore resident goes to Thailand, we can also scan the QR in Bangkok in Thailand. So that's the scope in terms of our involvement, where we do support the account-to-account, which is P2P, and also P2M from a person to merchant. And we are very much focused more on bilateral corridors, I think, as has been shared with the different regulators of different markets that came before me. The second piece that I would like to speak to is in terms of the success factors. I think there are 3 things that I would like to focus on, and I'm sure there are many important areas, right, that we need to be aware. The 3 things I'd like to speak to is, one is economics, second is risk management, and third is coverage. So from an economic standpoint, I think whether it is account-to-account payments or even for person-to-merchant payments, is, I think, very important to establish the economics involved to make sure that the pilot can be successful and scale over time. So like any new thing, it would take time for transactions to grow, for consumers to be aware. And for most, I think one of the precedents that is important for cross-border to work is that domestically it must have scale. When there is scale domestically, consumers will be very comfortable to be able to use when they travel overseas or even when they transfer to someone overseas. And likewise for merchants, if that form factor is well penetrated domestically, when consumers come from overseas, there's little hassle and they don't have to learn a new or use a new payment acceptance process to take the payment, because that can lead to suppression by the merchant saying, I don't know how to take your form of payment. So I think domestic relevance is important, and that then leads to economics there's economics of scale domestically, and then can lead to further cross-border transactions. Second point, I think, which is important for us to really understand, is, of course, we cannot underestimate how important is it to be safe and secure, right? From a risk management standpoint, we need, especially now that we're going cross-border, it is very important to make sure that the existing domestic rails are not compromised because we are enabling cross-border, the movement of funds to another country. So the governance structure to support cross-border domestically and with the partner overseas, I think is very important to make sure that there's always safe and secure transactions that are taking place, because trust is not easily built, but as we all know, can be lost very quickly. And last but not least, I think very important for cross-border, although I'm making this the third point, I'm calling this coverage. And coverage meaning, if I look at from a perspective of a person to merchant payment, from a person to merchant payment for coverage, it is very important to have as many merchants in that country take that form of payment when we do a bilateral. So given that NETS in Singapore for person to merchant payment, we are the scheme owner and also the acquirer, we are able to almost immediately offer all merchants or as many merchants for cross-border transactions. And we work with our counterparts in different markets also to make sure that when our residents go overseas to your market, that we would have as much coverage as possible. So it's important, I think, to make sure that we start right, so that when a consumer uses the payment option when they are overseas, the transaction can go through. If, for example, he will go to the second merchant and they were educated that they could use it, but they cannot be used, then I think what happens is what we call self-suppression. The consumer will suppress himself and not take it out the third time because he's embarrassed that he tried first time, second time, cannot use. So I think coverage is extremely important to make sure that there's confidence. There's confidence that the consumer can use, especially for P2M. For account to account, for P2P, for cross-border, also it's important that as many of his friends, family that's transferring money to, business associates, is also on the network on the other side, they can receive the payment. So I think coverage is the third point I'd like to emphasize that is extremely important. So economics, we've got to make it work both domestically before it can work, some scale domestically before it can work cross-border. Risk management, we can never underestimate the importance of safe and secure to continue with the trust of payments. And the third point, I think, is coverage, which is extremely important. I hope.
Lawrence, thank you very much. And I think, and again, it was good, Lawrence, for you to explain for people who don't know the context of NETS as compared to PAC Dodi and also our colleague at the Bank Central Filipinas, because your perspective is much more of a commercial executor within the marketplace, and therefore a different lens on perhaps some of the challenges of being able to create cross-border, where rather than the technical and the regulatory, actually the barriers for adoption, which are perhaps some of the biggest challenges in being able to get this initiative to be able to work effectively in any geography. I do have one question quickly for you before we move to Parawat in Bank of Thailand. Traditionally, particularly payment to merchant type transactions have occurred through, as you described, the usual schema cross-border. But do you see that there is a volume difference between people being able to use their debit stores of value versus credit as they move into the market? Is there a significant opportunity that exists compared to people using credit stores?
So I think I really like to think it's complementary, Nigel. Today, with the traditional schemes, the international schemes that provide cross-border payments to consumers and merchants today, as compared to what we have been talking about. And I think the main difference, I would say, is form factor, right? The form factor that we've been talking about, that we have launched for Thailand, and now we're talking about in other corridors. The form factor is QR, and QR tends to be the form of payment for merchants in the night markets, in the street stalls, as compared to credit acceptance. So I think the form factor makes a difference. The form factor is definitely cheaper from an acceptance standpoint for the merchant because the infrastructure is different. So I think I would really like to think it's complementary. I think from a transaction standpoint, the transaction count is relevant, it's very high. But when you look at where the transaction takes place, whether it is terminal or it is a sticker QR, it tends to be at merchants which are traditionally were more cash. Right?
Yep.
So it really eats into cash. I would say the phrase I like to use is a long tail merchants.
No, that's a really good insight, and as you say, complementary, not contradictory, and that is allowing a different type of transaction to occur in a very different place. And I think this is a really good segue to our next guest on the panel, and I think probably final, as we were unable to get our colleague in Malaysia to connect to Parawat in representing the Bank of Thailand, and in particular PromptPay and the PromptPay initiative. And that really is a good connectivity to Lawrence, having just talked about done a promotion for you, Parawat, on the PromptPay Pay Now initiative. So perhaps let me hand to you to talk a little bit about how Thailand is seeing the opportunities and the blend of opportunities, and also particularly PromptPay, perhaps as the initiative.
Okay. Thank you, Nigel and Camilla, and thanks for having me here. Well, I'm right now in Bali, in Indonesia, attending a conference, and just to show an example, it was like paying for my lunch using my phone from my Thai bank account number, using the linkage between Thailand and Indonesia that we've developed 2 years ago. So this is one benefit I could personally use from cross-border linkages. And it started out actually with PromptPay, which is our fast payment system that has been developed in 2016. And I think this is, to add on what Lawrence just mentioned, it is one of the prerequisites of a good cross-border payment linkage, is that you have to have a reliable and working domestic fast payment system first, right? So this is what we've done in the past, and two main use cases are the P2P money transfer and the P2M payments, QR payments, right? So once this has been established with we've had 50 million registered accounts for PromptPay, and over 7 million merchants using QR codes in Thailand. So it's been quite popular, especially during the lockdown during COVID. Has really made PromptPay very, very popular. And then we thought that we should be addressing pain points in cross-border payments as well, because as you know, it takes a long time, it's costly, there's no transparency, etc., etc. This is why we forged this linkage with Pay Now for cross-border remittances. So when we started to do this linkage, our first idea was that the user has to be at the heart of the system, right? So the user friendliness should be of paramount importance as well. So when I were to send, if I were to send some money to a friend in Singapore, I would just use a mobile phone number, and that's it, right? So the system would look up the name for me, and then besides putting the amount of funds that I would like to send, and then that's it, right? So two things that I would need to do, which is the same thing as for a domestic money transfer, right? So the other thing is that the funds would be credited at almost instantaneously. This is also a huge benefit for users. And now we have we've had over 500,000 users of PromptPay and Pay Now over the past 2 years, which is quite a substantial achievement for us. So what we are now doing besides P2P money transfer is that we also do this QR linkages with other countries, so that not only migrant workers benefit, but also tourists like me who travel a lot to these countries. So we have over 6 linkages now with Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Japan, and we are talking to Hong Kong and India as well for new linkages. So quite a broad number of countries in the region. And we do realize that there are issues with forging bilateral linkages. Is that you have to have resources, both human and IT, and et cetera, right? So we are also contemplating doing a multilateral linkage, what DG from the BSP has mentioned. So Project Nexus is also something that we looking into it and seeing it as a next level of cross-border linkages. So as you mentioned at the outset of the session, it's still we're still at a very early stage in cross-border linkages, but I think that it's a very, very exciting time to be here doing this at this moment.
No, Parawat, first of all, thank you very much for joining us from your taking time from the conference in Bali. I know half of the people on the call are thinking it's a great thing that you've joined us, and half of the people are thinking, damn him for being in Bali. but I think it's really, for me, it's quite a couple of things that you said that are quite interesting. One of them is how COVID has pushed a large number of people to be using electronic payment mechanisms. And it seems to me that lends to Lawrence's point, which was that you need to have coverage of the consumers in terms of issued product, and coverage of acceptance, in order to be able to have something that's then worthwhile transferring to become an international payment corridor, an international payment mechanism. It seems that certainly was something that helped PromptPay become the vehicle for being able to be the target for the government to go and use for this cross-border initiative. And then the other thing you mentioned was use cases, that there are particular use cases that you looked at as you started to set up these initiatives. So I'm just wondering whether just as a response, am I right in hearing that about what happened with PromptPay and COVID, and then the use cases choices? Is that what helped drive some of the decisions about where to make connectivity happen first?
Yes, you're correct. But actually, as I mentioned, PromptPay did not start during COVID. It started
Before.
2016, before, and then at that time we had to have some kind of initiatives or incentives for people to use PromptPay because people would say, "Oh, this is a government-run scheme." Merchants were so afraid of using this, elderly as well. So we thought that using the tax man would help us, like when before, when I did my tax returns, I would get the money through by a physical check, and then we told people that if you were to sign up for prompt pay, you'll get your tax refund immediately without waiting for a check to arrive in your mailbox, right? So this has happened, and then people started to use prompt pay, and then when COVID hit, we were so afraid of touching anything outside, especially banknotes. So this is when prompt pay was really popular, and now it's you can't live without prompt pay anymore. And once people realize this, that domestically they are used to this, they want to use this abroad as well. So and for a regulator like us, we also believe that there's a financial inclusion motivation there, right? Because not everyone has a debit or credit card to be used outside your country, and then the only alternative would be using cash. So this would be an alternative for them as well. And for merchants, they would not need to pay any fees to the any card scheme, because
any card scheme MDRs.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. No, look, thank you. That's super helpful. And I think four very different perspectives, all with the connectivity about the rationale for driving cross-border here in the geography, and the initiatives overarching with RPC, but the next step, as we've talked about, which is potentially the Nexus project, which hints to having much more of a multilateral clearing arrangement between countries as the next step. So it's fascinating to see how this development has happened, and so quickly. I mean, I think quite a lot of this is really only accelerated over the last 3 to 4 years, which is a short time span for intra-regulatory type of activities like this between geographies. So look, thank you very much for your time as well, Parag, today, and for the rest of the panel guests too. I think this sets the scene for the session that May will run now, which will be to take a view of the fintechs, to see how fintechs are seeing the opportunities to be able to use this kind of cross-border infrastructure to develop commerce and hopefully accelerate GDP growth and use cases on top of all the work that you as regulators have been doing.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is May. Sorry, Camilla, you want to say something?
Yeah, good to go. I do apologize to everybody in the audience for the technical difficulties. I hope you're enjoying all the updates. And yes, Maylam, we are ready to go with the FinTech panel. Stage is yours. There you go.
Thank you. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is May. I'm the advisory board member of EPAA. I'm also the CIO at Australian Payment Plus as of last week. So it's been a great pleasure to moderate this FinTech panel today for the discussion on the best practice for cross-border interlinkage. So payment is a lifeblood for any individuals and businesses. And for what is relevant for today's discussion, that is impacting 500 million population across its 5 countries in Asia. We have heard from Joe on the importance of this MOU and the ambitions and how it agitates and accelerates the cooperation in the regional connectivity and beyond potentially. And also we heard from the previous panel discussion on the infrastructure, which really resonated with me on how it's exciting and fast evolving space, and not only lowering the barrier for the new entrants to come to market, but it's creating a new business opportunity and ease the access and innovation of the ecosystem to collaborate. So pay tags do play a vital role in this ecosystem. This is an area of huge importance. Not only we have seen the tremendous innovation in the recent years accelerated by COVID on the digital technology and telecommunication, we pretty much can do to manage our daily life on a phone, from access to the bank accounts to make instant transfer and e-commerce domestically. However, the progress on the cross-border payments has been relatively slower. And the transaction chain of moving money from one country to another country is still quite expensive, clunky, inconvenient, slow, and may not be having the best experiences. So with the continuation and the commitment of the regulatory support and the government commitments that we have just heard, that is a huge potential to rewrite the history. In this panel discussion, we will unpack more on where are the real opportunities, what are the challenges, and what to look forward to. So joining us today, we are very fortunate to have an amazing lineup of panelists. All of them wear multiple hats, so apology in advance. I probably won't do any justice to provide a comprehensive bio. So, but to save more time for more in-depth discussions. So representing our Philippines, we have Letu Via, the chairman of Fintech Alliance in Philippines. And from Indonesia, we have Ibu Dina Artinurini from the Indonesia Fintech Association, where she heads up the payment system department. Welcome. And coming from Malaysia, we have Wiswan Aziz, country director and head of BD ASEAN at WorldRemit. He's also the advisory board member and the Fintech Association Malaysia. Representing from Singapore, we have Yogesh Sango, the global head of consumer business at NIAM, also representing the Singapore Fintech Association. Last but no means least, that coming from Thailand, we have Chonladat Kiramatama, apology for the pronunciation, is the president of Thai Fintech Association. So, and without further ado, let's get into the midst of it. So, so the first question, we would like to make it as interactive as possible. So I probably will be calling your name, but if anything that the panelists have discussed and you have comment on it, please do jump on it. So the MOU that we just have heard and is very exciting, and just to reiterate the intent of the connectivity to support the faster, cheaper, more transparent, and more inclusive cross-border payments, but intent to on the innovation. So let's just look at that. It is once in a history opportunity. So what are the key success factors to make this cooperation fruition? Wiswan, I'll probably come to you first.
Thank you, May, for the opportunity and also for the organizer for inviting us here. And definitely very privileged to be with Lito, Yogesh, Chonladat, and Dina here. I met Lito a couple of times when we were in the same group. Of course, Yogesh as well, and Chonladat. I've listened to Dina's voice before, but have not met her. Going straight to the point in terms of what I think are the opportunities for fintech. From what we've seen in our own country, Malaysia, there are actually quite a few elements that we need to focus on in terms of seizing the opportunities with the rapid innovation, the willingness of the regulators, as well as the increase in the level of literacy of the stakeholders in understanding the opportunities as well as the challenges that's now presented before all of us in getting to this. For Malaysia, the focus definitely is in terms of, it's a bit unique for Malaysia because the fintech focus from what we have discussed with the government, the central bank, and a few other government agencies on three matters. There's a conventional way of looking at things with this, which is talking about how the conventional economy works, and Malaysia being the leader in Islamic economy, that's also another aspect that we looked at. And the third theme that we are looking at also is on the alignment of certain thematic matters like ESG as well as the SDG that we need to look at, and how that actually could be aligned with all those two earlier matters that I mentioned just now on conventional as well as the Sharia. I will share further in terms of how this actually would come together. And it's not definitely an easy way to put this together and to make everybody understand. And I also have some ideas and had some discussion with the infrastructure providers. Unfortunately, just now Malaysia wasn't able to join the earlier panel because of technical abilities. But there was some things that we have discussed with the infrastructure provider, particularly on the payment infrastructure, in terms of the need for them to also upgrade the infrastructure that they have, to also enable fintech players, because we need to remember the infrastructure that was actually established earlier was really in favor of the incumbent players in the market, the banks and all those people who are already there. But when the fintech came in with the new business model, and that pose actually both opportunities and challenges. So I'll stop there. Then later we'll share with.
Because that is actually would be good to talk about the collaboration in the ecosystem.
Sorry.
No, I think that's good. The point that we raised on the fintech parts, that I think that we'll unpack more about the collaboration with the incumbent or potentially like non-financial services as well. So thank you. I may come to you, Lito.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, thank you so much, May, and of course, nice to see very familiar faces or friends in the fintech space. Yes, I think for that first question, definitely the Philippines, welcome this development, especially when all the central bank governors were able to sign this MOU insofar as having to provide that impetus towards having that interoperable cross-border transfers, because we've been talking about having to have the similar to an EU type of community where the ASEAN would also have the same kind of trade and economic ties, right? Beyond beyond the ASEAN community, right? So or leveling up that ASEAN community. But I think amongst the ASEAN participating countries, no, in this particular MOU, the Philippines would definitely be, would be more beneficial for us, considering the fact that the Philippines remains to be the fourth largest inward remittance market in the world. And as you see, we have quite a number of Filipino domestic, migrant workers, no, in various parts of the world, and about 38 billion US dollars have been, has been recorded as the volume of inward remittances into the Philippines. That's after India, Mexico, and China, and of course the Philippines as the fourth. So I think we definitely welcome this development, and in fact, and I think it's so much. There's so much delight in having that perfect timing, because we know for a fact that with this COVID, it's global pandemic, and now that we are seeing practically in a way going back to normal insofar as having to have that face-to-face interaction, or having to do quite a number of pre-COVID activities, we are also seeing the high adoption of consumers of digital payment platforms, right? So I think that's why I said perfect timing, because we could now see, with this collaboration amongst central bank governors on how we can see app to app or account to account transfers from one a mobile app, say from Singapore to a mobile app in the Philippines, or Thailand to Philippines, and vice versa, Vietnam, etc., right? Vietnam, Philippines, and so on and so forth, right? So this is really the beauty of having that collaboration, and I think this came in a very opportune time, because the Filipinos, or even citizens from various parts of the ASEAN community, would be in a way very much ready because of the higher adoption to digital payments, right? So that's why we look forward to having this this MOU signing, not just on paper but in actual reality, and seeing the traction and volume coming through. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great point. Get back to the execution. So, Yogesh, can I come to you next, please?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot, and thanks to my fellow panelists, also EPA for inviting me, and SFA for asking me to speak here. So really appreciate that. I think multiple things, right? I mean, as Rizwan as well as Lito talked about, and they're very knowledgeable on this subject. One of the things that we have in APAC, which is when I look at payments, and we at NEOM as well as at Instarem, we being a very global company licensed across almost 40 markets across the world. What we see is that when we look at Asia, which is where our DNA and where we started from, is basically that the whole payments landscape in Asia, we seem to have leapfrogged in terms of the way we've kind of progressed, right, as compared to the rest of the world. I came from a previous company where the check business in the US was a very large business. I don't remember having signed a check in Singapore ever since PayNow came in. So, and in multiple other places in the world, right? So we've kind of leapfrogged and we've moved ahead. So payments leapfrogged, and if you look at what Lito talked about, which is all these payment apps, we have super apps in every country which are doing well, and that really helps our payments, right? Because it creates an ecosystem. It just does not kind of create just a means of payment, but where to pay and what to pay. Because you know at the end of the day, in Asia, we've learned the fact that the job of payments is to get out of the way. Nobody comes in saying, I want to make a payment today. People want to buy something, they want to send money to dear ones, and our job is to get out of the way. So what happens in APAC, or what we're seeing in APAC accelerate, is that people, payment companies like us who believe, like Instagram, money simple, we want to get out of the way, right? 3 clicks, we need to be able to send money to our loved ones across the world. Our Amaze card, we can kind of spend overseas, spend like a local overseas, and everybody around is trying to do the same thing, make things easier and simpler for people to do stuff, right? The other piece that I feel is that cost is a very, very big determinant in Asia, and anything that we do, all the coordination that various players are doing in the market, at the end of the day, the end goal is to take that cost as closer to zero as possible. World Bank keeps on talking about the average cost of sending money in Asia. It is much cheaper than it's in Africa, right? But having said that, it can still be lesser, and especially people across the broad spectrum. And the third thing is connectivity helping commercial payments, right? One of the big things that's not addressed is how to send commercial payments across. Our SMEs at Instagram sending money to China, to Vietnam, to various places. So that's another thing that interconnectivity in Asia will help, right? And that's what we are looking forward to. So super exciting phase for a fintech like us, and we are looking at like how to leverage on each of these new mechanisms that are put in place by the central banks. Really happy representing Singapore, that the Singapore Central Bank does lead in a lot of these initiatives along with all the other banks here. So we are glad to be a part of this ecosystem.
Yeah, that's awesome because I think that's especially for the region, that's the SME market, the micro SME, and yeah, it is underserved and is the lifeblood as well for the whole economy coming out from the pandemic. So thanks, Yogesh. So I probably come to you, Jeanette, next for your insight from your market.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I think the key issue for our fruitful collaboration regarding this MOU is that payment is a key infrastructure to any other fintech segments, to any other economic activities. And in Thailand, I think we are quite doing well in terms of mobile penetration. Regarding the stats, I think we are the top 3 of the world in terms of mobile payment penetration, or to have like counting the people of internet user and counting the people using mobile banking. The penetration is quite high, top 3. And whether we like it or not, we are number one in the world in terms of the online purchases penetration, meaning that our people love online shopping, love online ordering of food, ride hailing, and everything. And our regulators are quite okay with that, with the development. And some of the regulations are even designed to govern that platform business model, blah, blah, blah. And in terms of the stat, again, if we are the typical Thai, that would be 416 times per year that we use the online payment or e-banking or e-money using the e-wallet. And I think we can share a lot of good experiences to other countries. So we should move from the cross-border payment into the borderless payment. So that's why our regulator, the Bank of Thailand, has done quite a good job in terms of connecting with 6 nations, from Japan to Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore for QR payment. And more specifically for Singapore, as you mentioned earlier, that we have the mobile number to transfer money to each other. I think infrastructure of the payment within our region can help a lot.
So from the Indonesian market perspective, Dina, would like to hear from your perspective too.
Yeah, I think the key success factors to make this cooperation fusion is actually on top of the stats that I actually already mentioned by fellow panelists, is actually also the support from the government. As we know that actually during 2022, actually Indonesia has become, the presidency of the G20 and one of the key factors or one of the key items that being highlighted during the presidency was actually how the members, including those in Asian country, actually can recover together and recover stronger from the pandemic. And I think on that part we are quite very supported by the government itself. During that G20, actually there has been like an MOU being signed among Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. And I think it's all also because of the advocacy, because of the statistic, and the number has been shown from the payment market itself. And hopefully with that, like a strong support among the governments in Asia, actually the MOU or the cooperations can, like being executed and showing a very good number in the coming years.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question I have is that looking at the population of these 5 countries, so over 60% of the Asian population remain unbanked or underbanked today. So the micro, small, medium business enterprises, they are critical driving. They are the driving force for the economies, accounting about 70% of the labor force. And also mentioned in the previous panel about the tourism as well as the migrant worker as well. So with that kind of dynamic, the mobile phone also penetration is significant, which outplays the credit card or even bank card penetration. So like as part of the intent for MOUs to bring the inclusion, so that we do have a real chance of bringing the financial inclusion to the markets. How do you envisage this ecosystem may play out in the next 5 to 10 years? From the PayTech perspective, do you see that PayTech is going to rule it all? How banks or incumbent may stay relevant? And I think doing this today, in the past hour, we talked a lot about collaboration, partnership, etc. How do you see that should really, to get this right, what would that partnership look like? I know there's a lot of questions that I've asked, but it's really keen to get your thoughts and understanding your market and how can that market to bring to work together, embrace each other. So anyone would like to start first on that?
I'll start, if I may take a stab on that one. I think it's really more about collaboration, right? So it's not about issue of whether the banks or the fintechs would be the one to be at the vantage point in terms of pushing for digital payments. In fact, in the Philippines, the central bank or the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas has been at the forefront in terms of having to promote a sustainable digital economy for the country. And with that, they came up with what they call the digital payments transformation roadmap, where it has two outcomes. No, one is on how to convert at least 50% of financial transactions in the form of digital, and how to onboard at least 70% of adult Filipinos to be part of the formal financial system by end of 2023, this year. And the good news is that we will be able to achieve those twin goals even before the end of this year. So the reason being is that all stakeholders, meaning the fintechs, even the banks or digital banks, etc., are actually in unison in terms of having to collaborate with each other and collaborate with government to really push towards having that interoperable digital payments ecosystem, right? For example, having to adopt the interoperable QR standards for P2M, for P2 micro, for P2B bills payment, etc., etc. And note that in all of these payments use cases, I mean P2P, P2B, and P2G, or payment to pay person to person, or pay person to business, or person to government, and vice versa. It would be the government that would have a sizable chunk of digitalization or modernization that has to happen, right? But again, the good news is that because they put their money where their mouth is, the government is really dead serious in terms of having to transform that manual payments system, that manual payments, practices in government in the form of digital. So in fact, the government right now even came up with we call this a priority measure, a priority bill in both houses of Congress on e-government or e-governance bill. This is on top of what we had before for the e-payments, a push insofar as BSP circulars are concerned, meaning having to require everyone to adopt QR, to interoperable QR. And practically right now, as I've said, the ultimate measure of success is having to achieve those two twin goals set by the government. So, and having to achieve those goals even before the set deadline. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Tina,
I think I just want to add what Alito has said. Actually, the government support is a key, and another thing, the previous panelists has said. Actually, payment is the infrastructure, and what the digital payment can do is actually to serve more populations like unbanked or underbanked. So hopefully, with that capability, government can support and will make sure that not only growing the digital payment, the non-bank digital payment, but also encouraging that banks that will move towards the digital banks also will work together with the digital payment, which at the end will be able to serve more populations of the financial services.
If I may sorry, I just want to add, very great point from Lito and Dina about in terms of how the potential collaboration could happen. What I see and has advocated many times in Malaysia as well as at other places is, since now we are moving into the digital economy scenario where it is largely driven by the usage of data and how the data actually can be analyzed to actually give us some ideas about what are the demand and supply. So stemming from that, this is where one thing that I think we also need to also discuss is about how do we identify the specific use cases, or in certain way we call it as specific persona in how payment actually could solve the problem. Because if we discuss about the unbanked or the underbanked with the perspective of how it was done before, then I think the solution that we expect is still going to try to solve the problem that we've had all this while. Well, going forward, the data would show us otherwise. One of the example that I want to share is when I got involved with creating some of the digital bank platform here in Malaysia. One of the things that we seriously consider in terms of creation of the business model is no longer look at the product and services, but we really study about who are the customers and what do they expect as far as their experiences in terms of utilizing whether payment, whether it's banking, whether it's wealth management, and how all these providers and institutions actually are going to be linked to the larger digital economy. So this is why I'm going back to the earlier point where if the infrastructure is not looking at it from that perspective, then we are actually solving the problem that we've already had 20, 30 years ago. But the new problem that we are now facing, we thought that we're going to solve that, and that there will continuously be a gap in terms of the understanding between the stakeholders, including the government agency themselves, because not undermining any government agencies, but the experiences that they have is not about the innovative world that we have now. They have had experience about what the bank looked like or the payment looked like 10 years ago. And 10 years is a large and long period in a digital era like now. So that's why I think there's a need to look at what really are the experiences that we need to understand, and then try to solve issues that stem out from those new experiences for all the stakeholders, government, infrastructure provider, including the innovative fintech solution providers, to actually address in a collaborative manner, so that it will be a really relevant solution rather than, oh, we thought we solved the problem, but actually we didn't. Yeah, that's my
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think there's another layers of collaboration when it comes to execution. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shannon?
So
Yeah,
I mean,
sorry.
just to add to that, I think one of the things we've seen during COVID was that there was generally hesitation before COVID for the underbanked and the unbanked to actually try out digital payments. But what happened during COVID was that because of the nature of the disease and because we were stuck in one place, I think people tried out more of digital payments, especially in the underbanked and the unbanked kind of section, right? A lot of it, I think their first interaction with the payments is usually remittances, getting remittances, sending remittances. We saw that that was a big, and with government led effort, I think we could do a lot to kind of accelerate that. I think that that is continuing, right? And hopefully, that will kind of help us move forward. But I do agree with Rizwan's point that that it will be, there will always be gaps if we don't solve for the future, and we try to solve for challenges that we have today.
Yeah, thank you. Last but not least, from the Thailand perspective, Jonathan?
Yeah, thanks again to our regulator, the Bank of Thailand. They have announced the new financial landscape of Thailand to embrace the open infrastructure like prompt pay, CBDC, open data to encourage the bank to open more API and to work closer with the startups and to open competition. So the last one, open competition, means that we will have the virtual banking license, and we will issue 3 new licenses, and it's going to be the first time after 1997 Tom Yam Kung crisis that we will have new banks. And the bank would be, I think it would be the collaboration. It would be the JV among the incumbents like commercial banks and telco and the tech companies. So altogether, I think there would be a big collaboration between incumbent startups, or startups to help the underbanked people. Because in Thailand, although we have such a high penetration of mobile banking, blah, 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 but I could see that most of them are underbanked. For example, we can see from the very high of the household debt to GDP. So it's 89%, one of the highest in the world, because I think people tend to go to shark loans, charging such a high fee. And for SMEs owner, they find the hard time, especially after the COVID, to get access to the loan or to the soft loan. So if we have new bank, virtual bank, or the collaboration between innovative startups and incumbents, I think we can use alternative data to help them to get access to the loan and to get access to any other financial services.
Yeah, it sounds like that will be a huge opportunity on the embedded finance to really foster in the region. So yeah, I actually prepared more questions, but just in interest of time. So one of my last question, more like the quick fire one. So I think that's like looking at from the global perspective, that the digital payment adoption is undoubtedly very progressive in ASEAN. And with the intent that we have of the MOU, we heard a lot about what would that be possible. So that's a lot of key lessons that we've learned from the adoption of the consumer perspective, the different ways of payments like P2P, P2C, even P2Gov, like governments, etc. So what would be your advice that we can provide to other jurisdiction and policymakers that globally that we should really learn from ASEAN region? Yogesh, can I start with you?
Yeah, I think just having real-time payments, which we have cracked in many markets in Asia, is a big deal, right? So US, for example, does not have ease of payments, right? Sending to each other. Like as a fintech, we find that we have to kind of wait for money to come in, and the customers want to pay. Do things instantly. That's our name, right? We're Instagram, but we have to wait for money to come in and stuff like that. So we have to sometimes take risk, and so which includes increases business cost and takes away overall cost. So I think moving to real-time payments, doing it quickly across the world, I think that's something that is very important. And then interconnectivity between regions also will be great, right? Because I think we've done some work. I think there was Singapore, Canada, that there was work done on, but it needs to accelerate much more. And finally, it's the G8, G10 currencies that matter a lot when it comes to trade, and in terms of B2B payments and stuff like that. So anything that can kind of accelerate movement and uh, and and let people know where their money is, because that's also another problem with traditional finance, which we are trying to solve through Instagram, where basically you don't know where your money is, and it takes a long time to make some bad
Transparency.
payments.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's
Thank you. Little?
Yeah, May, I think as a I think the key takeaway here is really on having to have an enabling regulatory framework, where your regulators would be would be more dynamic, proactive, and really forward looking. And in fact, the Philippines is I think one of the luckiest, if not the luckiest, market or country where we have the most progressive monetary board members, or central bank, having to push all these innovative digital payment solutions. And in fact, one of that would be having to promote open finance in the ecosystem. And at the same time, of course, one of the few countries in the ASEAN or in the Asia Pacific region where we have adopted the digital banking licensing regime, right? Where we now have 6 regional bank licensees, and at the same time having to do do a sandbox on CBDC, on central bank digital currencies, that we hope that with these 6 pilot participants who actually signed up for it. When RCBC is one of them, will eventually happen within the fourth quarter of 2023.
Yeah, thank you. I think on this CBDC can be a whole topic on this
Yes.
itself. Yeah, Wiswan, your perspective?
I think one of the things that is interesting for our region is we do have actually very advanced innovation. I mean, for us, using QR code is a normal thing. But if you go to the UK, they don't use this yet. But the flip side of what we have here is the level of literacy, particularly those who are unable to understand or unable to utilize the current uh, technology or advancement in the payment side, particularly, that create actually, as I said just now, the gap that is quite worrying because for those who are really at the cutting edge of development, we are really moving at the lightning speed in terms of creating all sort of innovation, and hence why we end up today with this MOU for all the nation to come together. But if we look inwards to our own stakeholders, particularly our own people in each countries, this is where I think one of the key issues that we need to address quickly in terms of bringing them up to speed, up in a very urgent manner for that actually to ensure one of the key components for this MOU to make it as a success. I think that's one thing that I want to share and urge everybody, particularly the government, to focus on immediately. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Dina?
Yeah, I think someone actually already mentions about interconnectivity and interoperability. It is something that actually I think the government has already encouraged, but I think in terms of regulatory reform, the government should also, um, make sure that actually sustainability of the industry itself, while in terms of serving the populations of the community, I believe in the Asian region we have a lot of potentials, and currently it has been shown during the pandemic itself that basically the people, the underbanked and the unbanked population has been using the digital payment. So it is something that need to be seen by the regulators as well, to make sure that we can address what is the pain points of this community.
Yeah, thank you. Charlotte?
I think if we may recommend to regulators or policymakers in other part of the world, I think they need to think of the use cases first, not the top-down one, the bottom-up one, to think about what would be beneficial to the people. For example, we can do a lot of hackathons, like policy hackathons, to let the private sector to submit interesting projects to the policymakers, or to do something like CBDC hackathon or any kind of hackathon. Then we can decide the policy to support that interesting projects. And we need to have such an efficient infrastructure in the way that it's affordable. For example, it's cheap to transfer money in and out, and not only the payment, but also anything around the payments. For example, the way to onboard customer, the KYC and everything. So I think it's like the holistic approach that need the bottom up and need the collaboration among the private and public sector.
Thank you so much.
What a fantastic conversation today has been, hearing both from the infrastructure panel led by Nigel and the fintech panel by May. And I really appreciate all of you that joined the tables. I had a great conversation on what's going on in Vietnam. Definitely a market that is on our radar and would like to learn more about. But I'll see if I have May and Nigel with me. We are just another 8 minutes on this call and in this event. So, May, what has stood out to you so far in the conversations you heard?
No, I think the first thing that I've seen is that the commitment from the government, the regulator perspective, that it definitely is there. is the foundation of any innovations. And if to move this forward, regulator, governments, policymakers do play a crucial, critical role. And I think that is something that, as an ecosystem, is really welcome. So Nigel is here, so yeah, probably pause here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I'll hand over also to Nigel. What stood out to you today? And then I'll let you to have a discussion between the two of you.
You know, I think it's interesting because on the table we were discussing the regulators have such an important part to play, but they also have an important part to play in terms of getting out of the way. It's very interesting. They need to be there to create the foundational layers, that's for sure. But then trying to craft the outcomes seems to be much more challenging for regulators because typically their objectives are different. And it was interesting. I thought what stood out for me today was that it was an interesting juxtaposition on the infrastructure side, driven largely by regulators or by local schemas. They provided, if you like, the connectivity and the framework. The fintech players talk much more about the use cases. I know the regulators talked about the use cases, but the enablement of the use cases is often the result of the fintechs, the result of the paytechs, and the envisioning of what a commercial use case could look like. And I thought that was quite an interesting juxtaposition, and what I heard there was the tension between figuring out how the fintechs are able to get access to be able to enable those use cases, access to the new rails that are being created.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you that from your observation. The other thing that I heard from the PayTech panel that resonated with me a lot is about the literacy of the stakeholders and who are the stakeholders. Are there any thematic drivers, and can that be aligned? And the alignment is not just within the domestic market, but now with the MOU is that what are the thematic drivers that's holistically that's the region need to harness. I think that is it's down to the execution. So I think the continued communication, collaboration, and the collaboration is not it's definitely not lip surface. I think there's a lot of different levels and dynamics of the collaborations, from the policy all the way translate to like the technologies, the processes, unpacking what are those use cases, that what is relevant, and how to prioritize. So I think it's a very exciting space of seeing how it evolve of that collaboration to what to the next stage.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when we talk about the different objectives of the different parties. I thought the most holistic objective was represented by the presentation from our Philippines Philippines colleague, where he talked about the fact that for them the objective is actually GDP growth. It is about, and he talked about it's about labor migration. It's about the 3 or 4 key levers that help drive growth, and therefore the reason for being able to create cross-border faster payment systems to make that easier was about enabling the GDP growth components. And I thought that was that was, if you like, as a regulator, that's the most holistic view that a regulator takes, because then everything else stems from that, and you don't get involved in the nitty-gritty of the use cases. You define ultimately the rationale for why you're doing something and hope that you're creating access for people to join. I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know, May, did you think? I thought it was an interesting comment by Lawrence when he spoke about the 3 things that were success factors in his view for making sure that this could occur. I don't know. It seemed to me that also comes back to this issue of you have to have significant relevance to start with. Otherwise, it's quite difficult to get.
I think that
to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially the first part that he talked about the economic. But what he said about the being able to scale, have that economic equations or the ingredient behind to get it right at the domestic level, before we go to cross-border. I think that was that's very interesting and certainly very resonated with me with my new role. I think that is definitely getting right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I saw the same being echoed actually by Parvat in Thailand, where he talked about how prompt pay, only after it had got domestic adoption at scale, was it then something that was relevant to go and help enable cross-border, which also thought was pretty interesting.
Good points from both of you. I also took home that comment about how you're using it domestically. And if we take into account also that APAC or our region has the most mobile migration, 40% of the global migration in the world happens in our region. So then it's so important to get the habit going, and then the people move cross-border, and hence the payments move cross-border over time in the habits. So I think we are at time. We have had some difficulties depending on who is big and who is not, but the content of this event has been fantastic. So I can just say thank you, May and Nigel, for moderated sessions. Thank you for all the participants on the panel, and to all the fintech associations that we're collaborating with. We could not do this without you. It's really a fragmented region, but when we are collaborating and we partner in this way, we really reach so much further. So huge thank you. We will be sharing recordings from this. We're also writing a report, and this is not the last you will see of the APAC FinTech Payments Forums. Please look out for future sessions, and let us know feedback and what you would like to see. So thank you very much for today.
Camilla, maybe one comment from the table that May and I were sitting at was that this initiative about cross-border interactions across the region actually is almost invisible to most players. There was one of the comments by one of the people on the table. And so I think this is probably the first time where we have had an holistic picture painted for about what's happening. That isn't just between regulatory papers. I think it's a huge first step forward, and I think it's a really important one for us as EPAA to continue to try to help promote.
Yeah, it's a great point. Just to say, the report from the last APAC Payments Forum was read globally. The rest of the world is watching what happened. They do know that innovation coming from our region, so it's really important to summarize that and broadcast it, both for us and for them. So thank you very much, and thank you for that point, Nigel. Thank you, May, and thank you all, audience, for bearing with us through a few difficulties, but it ran really smoothly at the end, I think.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Great job.